How does a Hollywood legend with a net worth of over $200 million end up dead, alongside his wife, in their gated Brentwood mansion, stabbed to death, and not a single child inherits a dime? Sounds like the plot of a dark thriller, right? But this isn't fiction. This is real. Rob Reiner is dead. Michelle Singer, his wife of more than 3 decades, is gone. Both murdered in the kind of bloody, brutal way that makes even seasoned LAPD detectives wince. The world mourned, briefly. But the mourning turned to murmurs, then to questions, then to suspicion. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that very same night, their son, 32-year-old Nick Reiner, was arrested on site. Not just detained, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But that was just the beginning. Because when the will was read, after the media frenzy, after the funeral, after the endless speculation, there was a final twist that no one expected. Not a single child inherited. Let that sink in. Rob Reiner, father of 4, a man known for his fierce loyalty to family, his deep-rooted political convictions, and his obsession with legacy, left nothing to any of his children. Not to Nick, not to Romy, the daughter who found their bloodied bodies. Not even to Tracy Reiner, the daughter he raised from infancy, a bond forged through adoption, Hollywood, and heartbreak. The estate, valued at over $200 million, went elsewhere. And what's more, it didn't just go somewhere unexpected. It went somewhere secret. But before we get to that, let's rewind the tape. Because this isn't just about a gruesome double homicide. This isn't just about Hollywood secrets or a messy inheritance battle. No, this story is about something far darker. Something that hides behind smiles, red carpets, and carefully managed reputations. This is a story about a family imploding from the inside out. So, ask yourself this. How does a man like Rob Reiner, beloved by millions, feared by some, respected across industries, end up murdered in his own home by the very person he once cradled in his arms? Or was it someone else? Because when Romy called 911, her voice shaking, there was one thing she said that no one could ignore. There's someone in our family who should be a suspect. She didn't say Nick. She didn't say a stranger broke in. She gave them a name, and it wasn't her brother. That alone would have sent shivers down the spine of any investigator. But what came next was worse. Because within hours of Rob and Michelle's deaths, rumors swirled of a second will. A document rewritten in the final months of Reiner's life. A document that revoked all previous versions. A document that removed his biological and adopted children completely. Who did he leave everything to? That answer, when it finally came out, sent shockwaves through the industry. But to understand why he did it, we need to understand who Rob Reiner really was. Not the version you saw on screen. Not the polished persona behind the director's chair. But the real man. The one who kept diaries. The one who confided in therapists. The one who, according to multiple sources close to the family, had serious fears in his final year. Not just fear of death, fear of betrayal. Let's go back to the scene. It's Sunday, December 14th. Brentwood, California. One of the wealthiest zip codes in the country. Rob and Michelle's estate, valued at $13.5 million, sits nestled behind tall hedges and iron gates. Security cameras at the perimeter. Inside, all appears quiet. Nothing seems out of the ordinary until around 7:46 p.m. when Romy Reiner arrives unannounced. Why? She told police later that she'd received a weird text from her mother, one that didn't sound like Michelle at all. It was short, abrupt, and most importantly, it ended with a word Michelle never used. Bye. Not love you. Not talk later. Just bye. Romy knew something was wrong. She used the security code to enter the front gate. She parked, walked toward the front door, saw it slightly ajar, and what she saw inside will haunt her forever. Both parents, lying in the entryway, blood everywhere. Rob clutching a cordless landline, as if he'd tried to call for help. Michelle's hand outstretched toward her purse, where her phone sat untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no stolen valuables, no ransacked rooms. Whoever did this knew the layout, knew the code, knew the dogs wouldn't bark. That's when investigators turned to Nick. He lived in the guest house, just 60 feet from the main building. He claimed he was asleep, but police weren't buying it. Not when they found blood on his shirt. Not when his alibi shifted 3 times in the same interview. And definitely not when they found footage of him walking toward the main house just 30 minutes before the estimated time of death. Still, there were complications. Because Rob had been seen in public 2 days earlier, talking to someone in a cafe, someone who would later be connected to a mysterious offshore trust tied to the estate. And according to Michelle's sister, who flew in from New York after the murders, there had been strange behavior in the house for months. Michelle had reportedly confided that Rob wasn't himself lately, that he was paranoid, that he had started locking his office, even from her. Was he scared of someone? Was it Nick? Was it one of the other children? Or was it someone else entirely? Now, here's where it gets even more disturbing. After the will was read and the kids were cut out, a single name appeared on the final page. One name, a name no one recognized. No lawyers could locate. No family members knew. The estate was placed in a trust, and that trust was controlled by someone who wasn't even in the Reiner family. But you'll hear more about that later. Because first, we need to peel back the layers of this family. The headlines make it sound like Nick was a ticking time bomb, that the sun simply snapped, that years of entitlement and resentment boiled over into a murderous rage. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if Nick was a symptom, not the cause? What if Rob Reiner had seen it coming? What if the $200 million inheritance and its redirection wasn't an act of betrayal, but an act of protection? In the hours leading up to the murder, Rob made several calls. One to his lawyer, one to his accountant, one to a number that, to this day, still hasn't been publicly identified. Who did he call? What was he trying to do? We have court records, leaked texts, eyewitness reports. And by the time we finish this story, you'll see the pattern. You'll understand why this wasn't a simple family tragedy. This was a deliberate unraveling, decades in the making. And just when you think you've got the full picture, we'll show you the page in Rob Reiner's personal diary that changed everything. Because buried between notes about screenplays and politics was a single sentence that explained why his children got nothing, in the name of the one person he trusted. Until the very end. But what that name revealed would rip the family apart, forever. What does fear smell like? According to the first responders on scene, it smelled like blood, gardenias, and old pine wood that night. Thick, metallic, still warm when they walked in. But here's the question no one's been able to answer. Why didn't Rob Reiner fight back? Because for a man who had directed some of the fiercest characters on screen, think A Few Good Men, Misery, The American President, the real-life ending he met was eerily silent. Too silent. When the first officer stepped through that Brentwood doorway just after 8:10 p.m., the scene was already set. Rob's body was slumped against the wall of the main foyer, blood pooled beneath him, a cordless landline still in his hand, his thumb halfway pressed against the emergency call button. Michelle, just a few feet away, on her stomach, her face turned slightly, her eyes open. Frozen in the kind of terror that doesn't come from shock. It comes from recognition. She knew who did this. No forced entry, no screams heard by neighbors. And most chilling of all, no sign of struggle. Let that sink in. 2 adults. Fit. Alert. A-list famous. Inside a multi-million-dollar gated estate. Cameras around the property. Private security patrols every night. And still, both dead. Both caught off guard. Both gone in under 10 minutes. You've heard of clean kills. This wasn't one. This was surgical. But why? And what? Or who? Was worth that level of rage? Now, let's walk through the timeline, minute by minute. Earlier that day, Rob and Michelle were seen by their housekeeper having lunch in the garden. According to her sworn statement, everything seemed normal. Rob was reading the LA Times. Michelle was texting someone, laughing at something on her phone. Around 2:30 p.m., she says she left, locking up behind her. By 5:00 p.m., Nick Reiner was seen entering the property through the side gate. Ring camera footage from the neighbor's driveway shows him wearing a gray hoodie, headphones on, carrying a grocery bag. He told investigators later he'd gone to get snacks and drinks from a local store, and that he planned to chill in the guest house all evening. But here's where it gets twisted. By 6:20 p.m., someone had manually disabled the security system's motion sensor from inside the house. And between 6:45 and 7:05 p.m., all camera footage suddenly cut out. Every single camera. Now ask yourself, what kind of murderer not only knows how to disable an entire surveillance system in one of LA's most secure neighborhoods, but does it without triggering a single alert? More importantly, why didn't Rob or Michelle call for help? The theory that they were ambushed only works if they never saw it coming. But the state of the room suggests otherwise. A single wine glass shattered on the floor. A chair overturned. One of Michelle's slippers found halfway down the hall, as if she had tried to run or was dragged. And on the wall beside Rob's body, faint, almost invisible unless caught in the right light, smears, 2 handprints, and 1 red streak that ran just beneath a framed portrait of Rob shaking hands with Bill Clinton. But that wasn't the strangest detail. Not even close. Because when forensics began their sweep of the study, where Rob spent hours each day, they found the safe wide open. Not forced open. Opened. And inside, empty. The journals, the hard drives, the legal files, all gone. Only one thing remained. A single post-it note stuck to the inside of the safe door. 3 words, scrawled in a rush. Not who you think. Now pause. Who was this message for? Investigators? Family? The killer? Or someone who wasn't supposed to find it? Back at the scene, Rob Reiner, visibly shaking, kept asking officers one question over and over. Did you check the guest house? Not who did this. Not is Nick okay? Not are they really gone? She said, check the guest house. Now here's where things get personal. According to leaked body cam footage later confirmed by LAPD insiders, when police approached the guest house, Nick didn't answer the door. Not immediately. When they finally opened it using the spare key from the gardener's shed, they found Nick in bed, sleeping, fully clothed. Music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner, and on the nightstand, a half-empty bottle of bourbon, a lighter, and a single latex glove. Let that last one sit. A single latex glove. When officers attempted to wake him, Nick reportedly mumbled something incoherent before asking, are they mad? Not who are you? Not what's going on. Just, are they mad? By now, officers already had probable cause. He was handcuffed, walked out, sat down on the curb, his head low, refusing to speak further. Then, something strange happened. As they placed him in the cruiser, Romy screamed. You know he hated Dad. You know what he said. But police, at the time, had no idea what she meant. What had Nick said? That part wasn't clear until later that night, when detectives accessed Michelle's phone. Buried in her deleted texts, a recovered thread with her sister from 2 weeks prior. Nick's acting off again. Rob won't admit it, but we're scared. The therapy isn't working. And the final line, timestamped just 10 days before the murder. He said if Dad cuts him out again, he'll make sure no one gets anything. Now rewind. What was just discovered about the will? That no one, not a single child, was included. Meaning either A, Rob had already cut them out, or B, someone changed the documents after the murder. But here's the most haunting possibility of all. C, Rob knew what was coming and cut them out as a final act of revenge or protection. So we ask again, what happened in that house between 6:45 and 7:46 p.m.? There's a 61-minute black hole in the timeline. And during that time, 2 people died, and the future of a $200 million empire was rewritten forever. But even more disturbing, the official coroner's report listed the cause of death as multiple sharp force injuries. Not a gun, not blunt trauma, knives. Rob was stabbed 7 times. 4 in the abdomen, 2 in the chest, 1 in the neck. Michelle, 9 stab wounds. Defensive injuries on both hands. Torn fingernails. 1 of her rings, missing. The attacks weren't just brutal. They were personal, full of rage. And here's the contradiction no one can explain. If Nick was the killer, and the scene suggests rage, why was he calm, clean, asleep? Why did he have 1 glove? And most importantly, why did a new name appear on the will? Not Romy, not Nick, not Tracy. A name with no connection to the Reiner family. A name no one, not even their lawyers, had seen before. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Can a house keep secrets? That's what investigators began asking themselves as they stepped into the guest house behind Rob Reiner's Brentwood estate. A cozy, modern bungalow nestled under eucalyptus trees. From the outside, it looked innocent. Stylish, even. A minimalist dream, frosted glass, neutral tones, an ivy-covered archway. But inside, it was a tomb of contradictions. And one question haunted everyone who entered it. What exactly had been going on in there? The guest house, after all, had become Nick Reiner's world, his sanctuary, his rehab, his hideaway. He'd moved in permanently just under a year before the murders. It was supposed to be temporary. At least, that's what the Reiners told their friends. A place for Nick to get on his feet. A place to write. A place to heal. But it didn't take long for that quiet little studio to turn into something else entirely. Let's start with the walls. Investigators noticed them almost immediately. Not because of any blood or damage. No, what caught their attention was what was taped to them. Dozens of index cards. Hundreds, actually. Scattered across the walls, ceiling beams, even the closet doors. Each one with a phrase or word. Control the narrative. No more shame. Silence equals compliance. He took everything. They lied. They all did. Was this the rambling of an unwell mind? Or a blueprint? See, Nick Reiner wasn't just the son of a Hollywood legend. He was a writer himself. At least, that's how he introduced himself in the rare interviews he gave. His 2015 film, Being Charlie, was loosely based on his own teenage battle with drug addiction, a story co-written with his father, Rob. It was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter for Nick, a public coming to terms, a cleansing of the family name. But after that film, nothing. No new projects, no TV deals, just silence. And within the silence, something started to fester. According to one former friend, who spoke anonymously to Deadline, Nick became increasingly reclusive over the last 2 years. He rarely returned calls. He stopped going to events. And when he did post online, which was rare, his tone was bitter. He always felt like an outsider, the friend said. Like even in his own family, he was the kid with the scarlet letter. The scarlet letter, in this case, was addiction. And while the Reiners had helped him through multiple rehab stints, some costing upwards of $150,000, the emotional distance had never fully closed. Which raises a haunting question. Did Nick feel like he owed his parents his life? Or did he believe they ruined it? One clue lies in a video file recovered from Nick's laptop, titled Message to Dad, Draft. The file was never sent, never shared, but its contents? Chilling. In it, Nick sits alone, staring into the webcam. He speaks calmly at first, then begins pacing. "You always said I was broken," he says. "You said the drugs were a symptom, not the cause. Well, maybe the cause was being your son. Maybe the cause was being told every day that I was lucky to be born into your name, but never worthy of it." He laughs. "But there's no humor. I wrote a movie about my pain. You made it about your redemption." He pauses. The silence is deafening. Maybe I should write another ending. Let that sink in. Maybe I should write another ending. Was it a threat? A cry for help? Or a confession? Planned long before the night of December 14th? But here's where things take a darker turn. Because while investigators searched the guest house, they didn't just find scripts and index cards. They found a wall safe. Not hidden, but cleverly disguised behind a mounted poster of Stand By Me, Rob Reiner's 1986 coming-of-age classic. Inside that safe, a single flash drive, password protected. And when LAPD cybercrime units finally cracked it, they discovered a folder titled simply, Truth. Inside were hundreds of files, audio recordings, journal entries, voicemails, old therapy notes, even transcripts from family meetings, some secretly recorded. It was a digital diary of family decay. In the center of it all, Rob Reiner. One audio file in particular caught the attention of investigators. Dated just 4 months before the murder. Nick's voice, shaky, tired, recorded during a private therapy session, unknowingly. "He doesn't see me," Nick says. He sees the failure. The rehab bill. The embarrassment. Every time he looks at me, I can feel the disgust. Then the therapist chimes in. "Have you ever told him that?" "No point," Nick replies. He's already decided. I'm not the son he wanted. I'm just the one he got. A pause. Breathing. Then, "I'd rather be hated than invisible." Let that line linger. Because invisibility can do strange things to a person. Especially when surrounded by wealth, legacy, and the constant reminder that your failure is the family's blemish. But does that justify murder? Does that explain why the safe in Rob's study was found empty? Or why the original will vanished, and a new one was discovered 2 days later. One signed, notarized, legally binding, and dated just 1 month before the murders. But here's where the story splits in two. Because while one version of events paints Nick as a spiraling addict desperate for revenge, another version suggests he wasn't alone, that someone else, possibly more than one person, had access to the guest house. Someone Romy hinted at during her interview with detectives. There were visitors, she said. He had people over sometimes. Late at night. Weird guys. Mom hated it. When asked for details, Romy added something even more ominous. Dad started locking his office after one of those visits. What was Rob hiding? Was he afraid Nick would steal from him? Or was he protecting something else? Court documents show that Rob had recently begun transferring funds out of his personal accounts into a private trust, not uncommon for someone his age, especially someone wealthy. But the pace and secrecy of those transfers raised eyebrows. Over $12 million moved in 6 weeks. Funds rerouted through shell companies. Discreet withdrawals. Anonymous beneficiaries. One of those companies, it turns out, was linked to a name that would later appear on the final will. A name connected to Nick, but not in the way anyone expected. We'll get to that. But first, remember the glove? That single latex glove found on Nick's nightstand? Forensics later revealed it had no blood, no skin fibers, no prints, but trace elements of bleach. Which begs the question, was it a cleanup gone wrong? A premeditated act abandoned halfway through? Or, and this is the twist, was it planted? Think about it. If Nick was truly in a blind rage, why stop to wear one glove? Why not both? And why leave it behind? Unless the goal wasn't to cover something up, but to make it look like he did. So we circle back to the most haunting phrase from the entire crime scene. Not who you think. Was that Rob's dying clue? Or someone else's manipulation? The guest house held many secrets. But perhaps the most revealing wasn't in the files, or the glove, or the videos. It was in a receipt, found crumpled behind the bathroom trash bin, dated 2 nights before the murder. A hardware store purchase. 1 item. 2 rolls of electrical tape. Why would someone in a gated Brentwood guest house need electrical tape? What was being prepared? What was being bound? We don't know yet, but the timeline was closing in. And soon, the discovery of one more name would flip the investigation on its head. Because as it turns out, Nick may not have been the only Reiner planning to write a new ending. What would you say if you walked in and found both of your parents dead on the floor? Would you scream? Collapse? Call 911 immediately? Or would you say a name? Because that's what Romy Reiner did. Not just any name. Not Nick. Not help. But one hushed name the dispatcher didn't even recognize. And that name, quietly spoken, buried in the middle of her 911 call, would come back to haunt the entire investigation. So let's go back to the night it happened. December 14th. Romy arrives at the Brentwood mansion at around 7:46 p.m. She doesn't knock. She doesn't ring the bell. She walks right in. Why? Because she had the code. According to her later statement, she had a bad feeling, a gnawing instinct that something wasn't right. A strange text from her mother. Silence from both parents. And an unspoken family rule. When things felt off, you showed up. No questions asked. So she did. She pushed the door open and stepped into silence. And then, into horror. Rob and Michelle, motionless, bloody, slumped near the stairs. But here's what's strange. She didn't scream. She didn't run out. She calmly walked into the kitchen, grabbed the landline, and dialed 911. Why the kitchen? Why not her cell phone? According to police transcripts, her phone battery was dead. Dead. Or turned off. Some believe it was a coincidence. Others say it's suspicious. But what she said next, unmistakably chilling. The 911 call began normally. Romy is breathing heavily. Her voice is low, stunned. Dispatcher, 911. What's your emergency? Romy, my parents, they're not breathing. There's blood. Everywhere. Dispatcher, what's your location? Romy gives the address. Dispatcher, can you see any signs of life? Romy, no. I don't think so. I think it's too late. Dispatcher, do you know what happened? Romy, pause. I think I know who did it. Dispatcher, who? Romy. Whispers, Eric. Eric. One name. One whisper. Almost lost in static. And here's the kicker. There is no Eric in the Reiner family. Not publicly, at least. No friend named Eric. No assistant. No chef, driver, or former bodyguard by that name. So who is Eric? When questioned later by detectives, Romy denied ever saying the name. I don't remember, she told them. I was in shock. But the call recording doesn't lie. She said it, and she said it with certainty. That revelation triggered a full internal audit of every person connected to the Reiner household. Staff, friends, advisors, business partners. Still, no clear Eric. Until a probate lawyer hired by the family revealed something explosive. While reviewing financial documents and insurance policies tied to Rob's revised estate plan, he found a name listed under a trust beneficiary. Eric M. Halberd. The same Eric M. mentioned in passing during Chapter 1, the one tied to offshore accounts and an unknown shell company. This was the first time anyone in the family had seen the name. And guess what? The trust wasn't created recently. It was created 3 years ago, by Rob, privately. And get this, it was sealed, meaning no one, not even his closest advisors, knew its exact terms. Why? And who was this Eric? Here's where it gets even murkier. Public records on Eric M. Halberd were almost non-existent. No social media, no press. One driver's license in Nevada, expired. One P.O. box in Los Angeles, closed. But one investigator followed the paper trail further and discovered that the same Eric M. Halberd had once been a patient at the same luxury rehab facility Nick attended over a decade ago. Let that sink in. Eric was in rehab with Nick at the same time. Now think back to what Romy said to officers that night, beyond the 911 call. There's someone in this family no one talks about. What did she mean? Was Eric an actual family member? An illegitimate son? A secret adoption? Or just someone who became family through trauma, through secrecy, through shared history? No one could say for sure. But detectives began digging deeper. And what they found cracked the case wide open. Because 2 days later, Romy made a second statement. Voluntarily, she walked into the station, sat down, and, without being prompted, dropped the bombshell. There were letters, she said. I found them years ago. Dad kept them in a locked drawer in his study. I read them when I was 17. Letters? Yes. From a person signed only E. Emotional letters. Rambling. At times threatening. At times heart-wrenching. According to Romy, one of them said, "You made me and then erased me. I want what's mine. I want my face to be known." Another read, "If you die before I get what I deserve, I'll take it from them, one by one." Romy never told anyone. Why? Because, in her words, "I thought it was some crazy fan. Dad said it was dealt with. I was scared, but I let it go." Until that night. Until she saw the crime scene. And something clicked. The calm. The precision. The message on the safe. Not who you think. In her gut, Romy didn't believe Nick did it. At least not alone. So who's Eric? Is he Rob's secret? A mistake he tried to bury? A financial associate gone rogue? Or something more sinister? A person from the past whose identity had been scrubbed clean? Now here's where the contradictions stack up. Despite naming Eric in the 911 call, Romy later denied it under oath. Why? Was she threatened? Or was she protecting someone? Because not long after that call, Romy stopped speaking to the press. She went dark. No social media posts. No public statements. No memorial attendance. She vanished. And when a reporter from Vanity Fair tried to reach her for a profile, her lawyer replied with just one line. "Ms. Reiner has nothing to add. She is grieving and afraid." Afraid of who? Or what? Because in the weeks following the murder, new evidence began to emerge. An anonymous tip, a trail of wire transfers, and surveillance footage from a nearby gas station, showing a man who resembled Nick, but taller, thinner, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. The timestamp? Exactly 10 minutes after the estimated time of death. Could it have been Eric? And if so, was he working alone? Or with someone inside the family? Someone who knew the codes, the habits, the blind spots? Romy's whispered name was more than a slip. It was a fracture. And as investigators looked deeper, the cracks in the Reiner family's public image began to widen. Because in a mansion filled with cameras, security systems, panic buttons, and trust funds, 2 people died violently. And the one witness who knew something went silent. But what she told the 911 dispatcher, just 3 minutes into the call, may be the key to everything. Because the next person detectives would question wasn't Nick. It was someone Rob Reiner had quietly paid $480,000 over the last decade. Someone whose job title had never been made public. And when that person finally spoke, they revealed a secret that Rob had kept for over 30 years. And it all began with one name: Eric. Why would a man rewrite his will just months before his death? More importantly, why would he erase his entire family from it? Rob Reiner wasn't just a Hollywood titan. He was a meticulous planner. A man who knew the value of control, both on and off camera. Whether directing actors, crafting screenplays, or navigating political firestorms, Rob always stayed 5 moves ahead. Which is why what he did in May of this year, just 6 months before his brutal murder, raised every possible red flag. Because he didn't just update his will, he scrapped it entirely and rewrote a new one from scratch. Now let's zoom in. May 9th, 2025. Rob Reiner walks into the office of a boutique law firm in West Hollywood known for one thing: discretion. The kind of place that services billionaires, foreign royals, and the scandal-prone elite. He has no appointment on the books. He arrives unannounced. No assistant. No entourage. Just him, a briefcase, and a manila envelope. Security cameras confirm the timestamp, 10:36 a.m. He meets with a partner named David Hallberg, an estate strategist who's represented everyone from Silicon Valley founders to Oscar-winning actors. Hallberg, in a later deposition, said Rob was quiet, focused, and very, very specific. So what did Rob want? A new will, a new trust, and one explicit instruction: no heirs. That was the phrase Hallberg would repeat in court documents. No heirs. Now pause. This wasn't a man estranged from his family. Rob and Michelle had just celebrated their anniversary with their children. Nick had been living on the property for months. Romy and Rob had been photographed together at a fundraiser weeks prior. So what changed? What triggered a 180-degree reversal in how Rob viewed his legacy? We don't know for sure, but we do know this. 3 days before that unannounced legal meeting, Rob received a package, hand-delivered, no return address. Surveillance footage from the property shows a man in a baseball cap and hoodie dropping off a padded envelope at the front gate around 6:12 a.m. What was in it? That remains under seal. But one source close to the investigation claims it contained 2 things: a printed email thread, a birth certificate. The names on those documents? Still redacted. But that was the day Rob canceled all appointments. That was the day his demeanor changed. And 3 days later, he changed his will. Now, let's talk about the contents of that revision. Because what Rob did was more than just exclusionary, it was surgical. He revoked all prior estate documents, including trusts, insurance beneficiary designations, and durable powers of attorney. He removed Nick, Romy, and Tracy from every clause. No properties, no assets, no percentages, not even sentimental items. Michelle was still included, but with one catch: only if she survived him by 30 days. Let that settle. Rob added a survivorship clause, which, legally, means that if Michelle were to die within 30 days of his death, her inheritance would revert to the new primary beneficiary. And guess what? She died the same night. Now let's talk about that new primary beneficiary. The person or entity Rob left everything to. On paper, it's simple. The Hallberg Trust. Established May 15th, 2025. Trustee Eric M. Hallberg. Purpose: philanthropic and private holdings management. Location: registered in Wyoming. Operates through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. What do we know about Eric Hallberg? Not much. But remember the name? Romy whispered it on the 911 call. And now it's written across every page of Rob Reiner's $200 million estate plan. Coincidence? Or something darker? Let's break down the 3 theories investigators are currently exploring. Theory 1. Eric was Rob's secret son. If true, it would explain the birth certificate, the private trust, the sudden exclusion of Nick and the others. But why hide it? Because if Rob had a child out of wedlock or through an affair decades ago and never told his family, this trust might have been a form of delayed redemption, a way to make things right. Except, why keep it secret? Why the elaborate shell companies? Why not tell his wife? Which brings us to Theory 2. Eric was blackmailing him. Let's say Eric wasn't a son, but a ghost from Rob's past. Maybe an old employee, a former addict, someone who knew something Something Rob didn't want public. A scandal. A deal. An affair. A cover-up. That package Rob received before rewriting his will? Could it have been a threat? Was this trust a payoff? A bribe disguised as a legacy? And if so, did Michelle know? Did she find out? Would that explain the tension in the house the weeks leading up to the murder? Would that explain the panic button installed in Rob's study just weeks before? Or, Theory 3. Rob knew he was going to die. This one is the most haunting, because if Rob knew, or suspected, that his life was in danger, the will becomes something else entirely. Not an exclusion, not revenge, but protection, a message. Maybe he feared that if he left the money to his kids, they would be targeted. Maybe he thought redirecting it would save them. But if that's true, it didn't work, because Michelle was killed, and Nick was arrested for both. Now about that legal meeting. Hallberg told authorities Rob was distracted, but not paranoid. But the revisions he requested tell a different story. He removed all backup trustees except one, Eric. He dissolved the family foundation. He canceled an upcoming charitable gala, quietly, without explanation. And perhaps most revealing, he added a private letter to be delivered upon his death. The letter hasn't been made public, but two people have read it. One is the trustee, the other is Romy. She was given a copy, hand-delivered by the attorney, exactly 1 week after the funeral. Sources close to her say she read it once, then burned it. When asked why, she said, because it was never meant to be seen by anyone else. So we ask again, what could Rob have written 6 months before his death that was so shocking his own daughter destroyed it? Was it guilt? A confession? A final goodbye to the child he couldn't protect? Or worse, the admission that someone else in the family was already compromised? The will revision wasn't just a paper trail. It was a ticking clock, a sign that Rob was preparing for something. And whatever that something was, it came for him. It came for Michelle. And it came before he could tell the rest of the world what he knew. But the next piece of the puzzle wouldn't come from a lawyer or a child. It would come from a woman most people forgot was even related to Rob Reiner. A woman who had every reason to stay silent, until one envelope changed everything. Her name? Tracy. What happens when you're raised by Hollywood royalty, but never feel like you belong? That's the story of Tracy Reiner. You may know the name. You may even recognize the face, especially if you've seen A League of Their Own, Pretty Woman, or When Harry Met Sally. But most people forget that Tracy Reiner is not just an actress. She's Rob Reiner's daughter. Or rather, she was. Because as the world now knows, when Rob's final will was revealed, Tracy's name wasn't mentioned once. No inheritance, no trust, not even a letter. But long before the estate documents stirred global headlines, Tracy had already been erased, not legally, emotionally, and it began decades earlier, in the quiet spaces between love, loyalty, and secrets. Let's rewind. Tracy was born in 1964 to actress-director Penny Marshall and her then-husband, Michael Henry. When Penny married Rob Reiner in 1971, Rob adopted Tracy as his own. She was just 7. To the outside world, they were a picture-perfect family. Rob was on the rise thanks to All in the Family. Penny was a powerhouse in her own right, soon to become one of the first female directors to dominate box office charts. But inside that home, things weren't quite so glossy. Tracy, in rare interviews over the years, hinted at being the third wheel. Someone who loved her father deeply but always felt like she was being tolerated, not chosen. In a 2012 sit-down with Backstage magazine, she said, "Everyone in our family was a character. Big energy, big voices. But I was the quiet one. I think my dad never quite knew what to do with me." Painful words, but telling. And here's where it gets even more complicated. When Rob and Penny divorced in 1981, Rob kept a close relationship with Tracy. He helped fund her acting education, brought her to sets, introduced her to producers and writers. But according to several family friends, something shifted after Rob remarried Michelle Singer in 1989. Michelle and Rob would go on to have 3 biological children, Jake, Nick, and Romy. And as their family grew, Tracy faded into the background. One friend, who asked to remain anonymous, said, "Tracy was like the shadow child. She was always invited, always smiled at, but it felt like she was walking on glass." Still, Tracy stayed loyal. She appeared in films produced by Castle Rock Entertainment, Rob's company. She attended premieres, She celebrated holidays with the family, but she never lived in the main house again. And when Nick began publicly struggling with addiction in his teens, Tracy tried to help, but was told, allegedly, to stay out of it. Why? Because she wasn't technically blood. That phrase, not technically blood, would come to haunt her. It wasn't just whispered behind her back. It would eventually define her role in Rob's estate, or lack thereof. Now fast forward to the week after Rob and Michelle's funeral. While media outlets were chasing down leads and investigators were swamped with theories, Tracy received something unexpected. An envelope. No return address. Just her name. Handwritten. Ink smudged slightly, as if it had been written in a rush. Inside was a single item, a photograph. Old. Worn. Clearly taken in the 1980s. It showed Rob and Tracy, together on a film set, smiling. He had his arm around her shoulders. But it was what was written on the back that made her knees buckle. To my first girl. I should have said more. I should have said everything. Dad. No date. No context. Just that. Tracy wept. Not because of what the note said, but because she'd never seen this photo before in her life. So who sent it? And why now? She brought the envelope to her lawyer. And that's when things got strange. The envelope had no stamp. It hadn't been mailed. It had been hand-delivered. Surveillance footage from her apartment building confirmed it. A man in a hoodie and cap, similar build to the one seen outside Rob's estate weeks earlier, had slipped it through the mail slot and vanished into the night. Was it Nick? Eric? Someone else? Tracy didn't know, but the message sent her spiraling. For years, she'd accepted her place as the outsider. She'd watched Nick struggle. She'd seen Romy thrive. She'd attended family events without ever being truly seen. And now, her father was gone. Her name stripped from his will. But somehow, even in death, he had tried to say something. Was it guilt? Regret? A cryptic apology? Or was it a setup? Here's where it gets darker. Just days after receiving the envelope, Tracy went to the family attorney to request access to Rob's legacy archive. A private vault of scripts, letters, recordings, and memorabilia he had kept at a storage unit in Burbank. She was denied. Why? Because her name wasn't on any authorization list. Not for the archive. Not for the estate. Not for anything. She was, as one firm associate put it, a legal stranger. But Tracy wasn't done. She filed a motion to contest the will. Her argument? That Rob was under undue influence when he revised it. And that key beneficiaries, including an individual of unknown relation, had manipulated him in his final year. That individual? You guessed it. Eric M. Halbert. Tracy's legal team filed subpoenas to unmask the trust documents surrounding Eric. And what they found raised eyebrows and suspicion. One transfer of $2.3 million from Rob's account to an LLC connected to Halbert occurred just 10 days before the murders. The memo line? Settlement agreement. But what agreement? And who was being settled? To this day, the content of that agreement remains sealed. But the motion gave Tracy something she'd never had before. Leverage. For the first time since the murders, she was in the room. She was no longer a shadow. She was a player. And she used her leverage to demand one more thing. Rob's private journals. Specifically, one volume dated 6 months prior to his death. Why that one? Because that's when the will changed. That's when Eric appeared. That's when Rob began locking his study. The journal was turned over under court order. And what Tracy found inside would leave her stunned. Among the pages of political notes, creative ramblings, and dinner recipes was a single line, circled, underlined, written in Rob's unmistakable handwriting. Tracy knows more than she thinks. Just 7 words, but enough to ignite a firestorm. What did she know? What had she forgotten? What had Rob meant? When she asked herself that question, her mind jumped back to something strange, something she hadn't thought about in over 20 years. A man who had once lived in their guest house, briefly. A young man, thin, quiet, pale. He'd stayed for a summer when she was in her early 20s. Rob called him a project, said he was helping him get back on his feet. She remembered Michelle didn't like him. He kept to himself, wrote late at night, smoked cigarettes in the garden. Tracy couldn't remember his name, but she remembered the eyes. Blue, sharp, always watching. Was that Eric? Was he part of the family's hidden past? Was he Rob's secret, or Rob's punishment? Tracy didn't have answers yet, but she knew one thing. She had never stopped being his daughter, no matter what the lawyers said, no matter what the will claimed. And now, with her legal challenge in motion and Rob's journal in her hand, she was about to step into the one place she never wanted to return to, the main house. Because behind one bookshelf in Rob's study was a compartment she remembered from childhood. And what was hidden there, untouched for years, would reveal a truth no one was ready for. Not even Tracy. What if the $200 million Rob Reiner fortune wasn't about family at all? What if it was about redemption? Because as Tracy prepared to return to the Brentwood estate, not as a mourner, but as a legal challenger, she couldn't shake a single question. Why would her father leave everything to a man no one had ever heard of? It wasn't just bizarre. It was unlike him. Rob Reiner was a lot of things: passionate, political, intense, but he was never careless. Every dollar he spent, every project he backed, every cause he aligned with, it all meant something. So why funnel his entire estate into a trust managed by a virtual ghost? Unless that trust was his final cause. And Eric was the beneficiary of a debt no one ever knew existed. Let's back up. In the months after Tracy filed her motion to contest the will, her attorneys gained access to Rob's philanthropic financials. Not the flashy ones everyone knew about, like his public donations to progressive causes or his vocal support for Democratic candidates, but the private ones. And what they discovered was startling. Over the past 10 years, Rob had been pouring millions, quietly, steadily, into an organization no one had ever linked to him. It was called the Renaissance Accord. Sounds official, fancy, respectable, except it didn't have a public-facing website. No press releases, no high-profile board. Just a P.O. box in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and one listed director, Eric M. Halbert. Here he was again, the man named in the trust. The same name Romy whispered during the 911 call. And now, the head of a mysterious foundation that had received over $37 million from Rob Reiner's private accounts between 2014 and 2025. So, what was the Renaissance Accord? That's what Tracy wanted to know. Her legal team dug deeper. Tax filings showed the organization had 501c3 nonprofit status, which meant it was legal, at least on paper. But its stated mission? Vague at best. Restorative intervention for trauma-impacted individuals and their creative expression. Sounds noble, right? But when reporters tried to contact the organization, they got radio silence. No returned emails. No voicemail. No staff directory. It was a black hole, except for one lead. A therapist in Sedona, Arizona, who'd worked with the Accord as a consultant years earlier. She spoke to Rolling Stone on background, and what she revealed was nothing short of shocking. The Accord, she said, wasn't a traditional nonprofit. It was a shadow operation for survivors of institutional abuse, many from the entertainment world. People who had been through the worst, abandoned children, former addicts, victims of exploitation, and who wanted to rebuild their lives in private. That's where Rob came in. He didn't want his name on anything. He didn't want attention. He wanted to help. According to this source, Rob sponsored over a dozen individuals through the Accord, paying for therapy, housing, film classes, even art grants. It was his quiet penance. Why? Because, she said, he'd seen things. Things in Hollywood. Things in the 1970s and 80s. Things he couldn't forget, couldn't unsee. So instead of going public, he created a shadow legacy. He poured his fortune into fixing what he believed he'd been complicit in, even if passively. And Eric? Eric was his success story. According to this same source, Eric was one of the first people Rob sponsored. He'd met him in a court-mandated rehab facility in Malibu in 2006. Eric was 13 at the time. Yes, 13. An orphan. In and out of the system. Abused. Addicted. Silent. But smart. Gifted. A writer. Rob allegedly saw himself in the boy. He paid for his schooling. Put him through therapy. Gave him a place to stay for 2 years. In a guest house. Tracy's memory? Confirmed. Eric was that boy. And over time, Rob did more than help him recover. He empowered him, gave him the legal authority to direct the Accord, handed him the keys to an empire of secrecy and silent healing. But that choice, that devotion, came at a price. Because Rob never told his family. Not Tracy, not Romy, not Nick, not even Michelle. Only his attorneys. Only his accountant. only his diary. And in one chilling entry, now unsealed in the estate dispute, Rob wrote, "I created a second son, not by blood, by need. And I'm more proud of him than I'll ever be of the others. That's the truth. And it hurts. Let that line settle. More proud of him than the others. What would that do to a family? To a son like Nick, already struggling with rejection and addiction? To daughters who watch from the sidelines while their father uplifted a stranger? Was it admirable? Or was it betrayal? And what did it have to do with Rob and Michelle's murders? Because here's where things take a wild turn. In the final weeks before their deaths, Michelle had started asking questions. According to her sister, who reviewed text exchanges and emails, Michelle had begun noticing large wire transfers going out of their joint account. When she confronted Rob, he brushed it off. Charity stuff, he said. But Michelle wasn't convinced. She started asking the housekeeper questions. She tried, unsuccessfully, to log into Rob's private laptop. And 3 weeks before her death, she scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor. She canceled it the next day. Why? Was she silenced? Was she scared? Or had Rob finally told her the truth? A truth that ended with her lying in a pool of blood beside him. And here's the contradiction. If Rob truly loved Eric, and if Eric was a symbol of his legacy, why would Eric ever hurt him? Unless someone else got to Eric first. Unless Eric's inclusion in the will was manipulated. Or worse. Unless someone used Eric's name as a front for something Rob never intended. Because there's one more twist. The day after Rob's death, the Renaissance Accords bank accounts were emptied. All $22 million remaining in their operating accounts vanished in under 12 hours. Transferred to a Cayman bank. Then closed. And Eric? Disappeared. His phone disconnected. His last known apartment abandoned. His digital trail erased. So now, we have a dead couple, a rewritten will, an erased fortune, and a missing man named in both a 911 call and a murder victim's private journals. Is Eric dead? In hiding? Or watching it all unfold? And if he didn't kill Rob and Michelle, who did? Because the next piece of this twisted puzzle wasn't buried in a trust. It was hidden in Rob's study, behind a bookshelf, in a hollowed-out panel. And what was found there was written by Rob himself. A confession, a warning, and a name no one expected. How do you disappear in plain sight? How do you exist in the shadows of a Hollywood empire, known by name to no one, but written into the will of a man with a $200 million legacy? Eric M. Halbert, the ghost at the center of the Reiner mystery, whispered during Romy's 911 call, named as the sole beneficiary of Rob Reiner's revised estate, connected to a nonprofit no one knew existed, now vanished, with millions traced to accounts offshore. But who is he? This chapter begins in Rob Reiner's study, a place more intimate than any bedroom, more guarded than any vault. It was his sanctuary, lined with bookshelves, awards, personal mementos. But one shelf, the oldest one near the bay window, held a secret. Tracy remembered it. From childhood. A creaky panel that Rob always kept locked. No one was allowed to touch it. And after his death, that section of the study remained untouched for weeks. Until court-ordered estate investigators were allowed entry. Behind that shelf, a panel, hollowed out. Inside, a journal, wrapped in fabric, tucked behind a sealed envelope. This wasn't just any journal. It was handwritten, personal, raw, labeled only, M. Every page was about Eric. From the moment Rob met him, to the moment he named him as his heir. Let's go back. According to the journal, Rob first encountered Eric M. Halbert in 2006. Rob had been visiting a rehab center in Malibu, doing a private fundraiser for a friend's child. He wasn't expecting to meet anyone, but that day he wrote, "I saw a boy with fire in his eyes. Not rage, not hate, fire." Eric was 13, a ward of the state, emotionally shut down. But according to staff, he was brilliant, far beyond his age. He wrote poetry, drew storyboards, but he didn't speak until Rob approached him. "I asked him who he wanted to be," Rob wrote. "He said, 'Not this.'" That's when I knew. Rob sponsored him quietly, paid for therapy, tutors, housing, set him up in a safe house near Laurel Canyon. He didn't tell Michelle. Not at first. Not even his lawyers. It was just between them. "He was mine," Rob wrote. "My secret son. No blood, but more truth than anything I'd created." Now let's pause. To Rob, Eric wasn't a replacement for Nick, but he was a response. Because during those years, Nick was spiraling, addiction, arrests, failed rehab attempts. Rob tried, but their relationship was volatile. In one entry, Rob writes, "Nick resents me. I resent his resentment. It's a loop I can't break." With Eric, it was different. Eric wrote screenplays Rob never showed anyone. Eric built websites for small charities Rob quietly funded. Eric was the ideal, the promise of legacy without the chaos. But here's where it gets twisted. Because as Eric grew older, something shifted. In one entry, Rob wrote, he's starting to ask questions about why he doesn't have a last name anyone recognizes, about why he's hidden. He wants acknowledgement. I told him the world wouldn't understand. He said I was a coward. The tone of the journal darkens. Eric becomes erratic. He moves to Oregon, then Arizona, then disappears for a year. When he returns, he asks Rob for something chilling. Make it legal. He wanted to be written into the will, not just as a charity recipient, as family. Rob refused, at first, but then came the package. The one hand-delivered just days before Rob changed his will. Inside, according to Tracy's legal team, was a DNA test, one that Rob had never agreed to take, one that proved, with 99.99% certainty, that Rob Reiner was Eric's biological father. Now stop. This changes everything. Because if that test was real and Rob believed it, then Eric wasn't just a project. He was his son. But there's a catch. The DNA test was never verified. There were no lab documents. No chain of custody. Just a letter. Just a sample. Could Eric have faked it? Could someone else have? One entry in the journal suggests Rob wasn't fully convinced. He wrote, "Either it's true, or it's the most elaborate forgery I've ever seen. Either way, it means I owe him something." That line, "I owe him something," may have been the key. Because just 1 month later, Rob walked into that law office and rewrote his will. Removed Nick, Romy, Tracy, named Eric, set up the Halbert Trust. Then vanished from public view for nearly 2 months. What happened during that time? We don't know. But in his final journal entry, dated 12 days before the murder, Rob wrote, "He's angry again. Keeps asking if I told Michelle. I haven't. I'm scared. Not of what he'll do to me, but of what he'll do to them." Read that again. Not of what he'll do to me, but to them. Is that why Rob created the survivorship clause in his will? Is that why he emptied his safe? Is that why Michelle's phone was found untouched and her last text was one chilling word? Bye. Was she trying to warn someone? Or was that text from someone else, pretending to be her? Because here's what we now know. Eric had motive. He had access. And now he had money. All $200 million of it. But the final twist of this chapter? Eric may not be real. At least, not fully. Investigators ran facial recognition from the old rehab center files. Compared them to surveillance footage from the Brentwood property. Matched them against DMV records. The result? Inconclusive. Why? Because the man seen dropping off the letter at Tracy's door was not the boy in the file photo from 2006. Same name, same birth date, different face. So now we ask, was Eric a construct? A persona? A vessel for something Rob wanted to hide? Or did someone become Eric to access the fortune? Because the signature on the revised will? It wasn't Eric's. It was someone else's. And when the handwriting analysis came back, it matched a family member. One still alive, one still silent, and one who may have orchestrated the greatest heist in Hollywood history, using the name of a boy who never existed. But what came next would expose the final player in the game. A person no one expected. Not Romy, not Nick, not even Tracy. Can a house keep secrets? That's what investigators began asking themselves as they stepped into the guest house behind Rob Reiner's Brentwood estate. A cozy, modern bungalow nestled under eucalyptus trees. From the outside, it looked innocent, stylish even. A minimalist dream, frosted glass, neutral tones, an ivy-covered archway. But inside, it was a tomb of contradictions. And one question haunted everyone who entered it. What exactly had been going on in there? The guest house, after all, had become